Today I'm going to walk you through a recipe for making chocolate pecan praline bars by a famous French pastry chef. The recipe is approachable, delicious, and as always, I'll give you lots of tips along the way to guarantee your success and level up your chocolate skills. Hello, this is Chef Zach Townsend with Dallas Chocolate Classes in Dallas, Texas. In this video, I'm featuring French pastry chef Yann Couvreur. Now, his last name's a little bit difficult to anglicize. He is a pastry chef that I discovered relatively recently, and I remember walking into his pastry shop in the Marais district of Paris and being impressed by everything that I saw and everything that I tried. His pastry shop has locations not only in Paris, but also in Miami, Florida. So if you're in that region, you can check him out there. He has done YouTube videos, but I haven't seen him on YouTube in a couple of years. But he made a video of his chocolate pecan praline bars, and I found it to be a great recipe and one that I thought you would love to learn as well. I really love this recipe, and what's most important is that in the end it's delicious. So let's get started. So this recipe has 5 components to it, and it's a great learning opportunity for that reason. But if you break down each component separately, then it's not too difficult. So we have the pecan praline base, the soft caramel, the sweetened pecans, the chocolate glaze for dipping, and the chocolate decor. Now, for recipes with multiple components like this, always plan well ahead, measure everything out first, and understand what your workflow is going to be. That way you stay more organized. For my translation of the measures of each component, I have placed them in the description as well. All right, so the first thing that we're going to make is the pecan praline base, and we are going to make a dry caramel to do that. Now, praline or praline typically means caramelized nuts, or most often caramelized almonds, and a praline usually refers to those nuts processed into a nut butter, so a caramelized nut butter. Now, to do this, he's going to at first make what's called a dry caramel. Now, we have 2 ways that we can make caramel. We can do a wet caramel, and then we can do a dry caramel. So a wet caramel is when you add water into the sugar and you boil that until it reduces down and begins to caramelize. A dry caramel is when you simply add dry sugar into a saucepan and you heat it and slowly melt it into a caramel. The wet caramels can be a little bit more easy to control. The dry caramels, you have to be a little bit more on top of it. You have to be stirring and a little bit and ensuring that it doesn't clump, and also adding the sugar a little bit at a time to the saucepan. So that's what he's doing here. Now, you do want to control the heat. You don't want this to go too quickly. And I always tell people, when you are making a caramel, make sure you think ahead, because this is extremely hot. This is one of the hottest things that you can make in the kitchen. So make sure that you have a surface that you can set your saucepan on top of. And then, of course, use a wooden spoon or a silicone spatula as well for stirring the caramel. So this is going to get up to a temperature of around 360, 380 degrees. So it's very hot, so you have to be very careful. All right, so now we see that the caramel is finished, and it's a nice dark amber color. So you want to get it nice and dark. That way it's got a really good, strong flavor to it. He's now placing the salt on top of the nuts. Now, one thing here, make sure that you also have the pecans placed on something very heat-proof. So he's obviously getting ready to pour this caramel directly onto the pecans. So don't set the pecans on something that's going to very easily melt. He's got a silicone baking mat that he's using, and make sure there's something very heat-proof underneath that as well, so it doesn't impact your counter or anything else that you're pouring this hot caramel onto. So he's now coating the pecans, and you don't have to coat the pecans entirely here because we're getting ready to process them to grind them into a nut butter. All right, so the next step here is to wait for this to cool down completely and harden so that it can be processed into the praline. All right, so now it's time to process the pecans into the praline, and he's using a Thermomix machine here that you see on screen, but you can use a food processor. And what's really important here is the texture of this praline. So you can see why I call it or describe it, or it is described as a caramelized nut butter. So it turns it into a paste. You do have to keep going for several minutes. It can take several minutes in the food processor to actually break down all the nut oils so that it begins to turn into a paste. But he is making the point here that this actually needs to stay a little thick, so a little coarse and rough in texture, not too thin of a texture for this particular recipe. All right, so now he's going to introduce milk chocolate into the praline. And the reason he is doing this is he wants to set the praline to be a little bit firmer. So if you were to just leave the praline on its own, it would not set very firm. And one thing you have to remember is that this is going to serve as the base of the bar. So what he's doing is he's adding in some chocolate so that the cocoa butter in the chocolate will set and the praline will be a lot firmer, and therefore serve as a much more stable base for the bar. Now you can do this with dark chocolate as well if you wish. He's using in his recipe milk chocolate, but dark chocolate would work as well. He's only adding a little bit, just enough to get the crystallization to help set this mixture into a much firmer base. All right, so it's now time to start filling the mold. Now he has chosen a silicone mold here for bars, and check the description for the mold that I recommend for this. It's slightly different than the incised one he has, but it will work perfectly as well. So he's now transferred the praline with the milk chocolate into a pastry bag, and he begins to fill the mold. Now, one thing you have to remember is that he's going to fill the mold only halfway. Now, you can also do this step well ahead, so if you need to do it a day or two ahead before finishing the bars, that's perfectly fine as well. So into the refrigerator to get this base fully set, and then on to the next step. All right, so we are now back at the stovetop, and it is now time to make another caramel. However, this is what he calls the soft caramel that goes on top of the praline base. So he's going to do exactly what he did before, and that was to use sugar in a saucepan with no water to create what's called a dry caramel. And he's going to stir and slowly add the sugar as he did before. So just make sure you caramelize this evenly. Now he's going to deglaze the caramel by adding the warm cream. So this is what will keep this caramel soft as opposed to the caramel that went on top of the pecans. So add the cream slowly, make sure the cream is warm as well so it doesn't bubble up furiously. And he's got a pinch of salt in there as well. And now he's going to continue to stir it so that it's nice and even, homogeneous, and he'll add it to the pastry bag to then add on top of the praline base. But before doing that, it's now time to make the sweetened pecans for the center of the chocolate bar. Now he has made a simple syrup made from sugar and water, and he's poured that over the pecans in a bowl. He stirs the pecans, and now he's going to let them sit there for 15 or 20 minutes in order to absorb as much of that additional sweetness as possible. He then drains the pecans after about 20 minutes of soaking and spreads them out onto a mesh silicone baking mat, which is often referred to as a silpan. And now he's going to toast them lightly at about 340 degrees, 170 degrees Celsius for 15 to 20 minutes in order to get a nice caramelization on those pecans. This is actually a great idea for any type of nut as well that you need to include in another recipe. And just so you know, you obviously don't have to use pecans in this recipe. Let's say you wanted to do hazelnuts instead, or almonds. You absolutely could use those types of nuts in this recipe instead of pecans. So that would be a great experimentation for you to try different nuts that you like. All right, so now it's time to apply the soft caramel onto the bars. So he has removed those cold bars from the refrigerator, and as you can see, he's striping those bars, the bases, with that soft caramel. Again, this is the caramel that he put the cream in. Now it's time to place the sweetened pecans on top. So he gets all those on top and pressed a little bit down into the caramel so that they will stick. So the caramel has helped stick the pecans, and now he's going to get them ready for enrobing into the chocolate. So he's going to place toothpicks down into the bars, 2 toothpicks per bar. And it's really important that these bars be cold when you dip them so that they keep their shape, they don't fall apart. And so he's going to go back to the refrigerator for a few minutes to ensure that they are nice and cold. All right, so now it's time to enrobe the bars, and he's going to use milk chocolate here. And as I mentioned earlier, you could actually turn this bar into a dark chocolate version if you wanted to. So feel free to experiment using a dark chocolate in this step as well. And what he's doing here now is he's adding oil into the chocolate. And I've talked about this before in previous videos. So whenever you add oil into melted chocolate, which is a very common practice, the chocolate will set back at a softer texture. So this bar doesn't necessarily have a chocolate shell on it, so we don't need to fully temper the chocolate. We're just going to melt the chocolate and then add a little bit of the oil. Now, it's very important in this step that you do not overheat the chocolate. What I would recommend is simply put the bowl in the microwave and melt the chocolate that way. But start out with a few seconds first. Take the chocolate out, stir it, go back into the microwave, heat it up for a few more seconds, take it out and stir it. Keep stirring it and going back and forth into the microwave until it's fully melted. But you do not want the chocolate to overheat whatsoever. In fact, if you overheat the chocolate, then when the chocolate coating sets on these bars, you might find more blotching and fat blooming. So that's one of the reasons that it's very important not to overheat the chocolate in this case. All right, so now it's time to dip the bars. So he's making a point here that this is a very delicate operation. Now, real quick, you notice obviously that the bars are out of the mold. So how did he get the bars out of the mold? Well, simply by popping them out. And if they are cold, then they won't break, or there's at least a lot less risk of breaking. Now be very careful about taking them out. And technically you could freeze them if you wanted to pop them out and then allow them to thaw in the refrigerator. But as long as they're very cold, they should come out pretty cleanly. So now he is picking up each of the bars by the toothpicks and delicately dipping them. And if for some reason you did overheat your chocolate, be careful here. You want to allow it to cool before you dip the bars in. So that way, if it's too hot, it doesn't impact the bars. So if you feel that your chocolate's very hot, just make sure that it cools down a little bit, but still remains fluid enough to be a coating before you dip the bars in. So as you saw, he scraped off the bars, the excess chocolate on the side of the bowl, and he has put down here a silicone baking mat, and he places the bar on the mat there to fully set. All right, so it's time now for the final step. So what he's done here is he has melted some dark chocolate, and he's melted it at the lowest possible temperature. This is simply solid chocolate, and he's kept the chocolate cool while melting it. So again, it avoids fat bloom whenever the chocolate sets due to possibly overheating the chocolate. So melt it at the lowest possible temperature. Now, this being dark chocolate, what if you had used dark chocolate to actually dip the bars in? Could you use dark chocolate here as well for the striping? You most definitely could. You would still see a color contrast on the bar if you wanted to do it that way. But you could flip it, and instead of using dark chocolate here for the striping, you could use milk chocolate instead. So, and just remember that milk chocolate melts at a much melts at a lower temperature, so be even more careful whenever you're melting milk chocolate. So now it's just a simple striping of the chocolate over the bars, and you see that he's put this in a pastry bag and cut a very small hole in the bag to keep the stripes very thin. So voila, the bars are now done and you can enjoy them, and that's what he's about to do. So I hope you enjoy the recipe and that you learned something new. Thanks for watching. The easiest way to support my channel is to simply hit the like button or leave a comment. You can now also support my work to bring you proven new recipes and informative content by joining my Patreon page, where you'll now find different tiers for exclusive perks. This will help support the work that I do for you here and is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.